What's up guys, Asian here again with a PTS theory crafting video. So this is taking a look at the elsewhere PTS, so just keep in mind that any results that you see from this video might be subject to change depending on any sort of changes that might be made throughout the PTS cycle. This particular video we will be taking a look at the new Magicka DPS set that is dropped from the Sunspire trial, False God's Devotion, and we're going to be taking a look at how that stacks up to current meta sets. Specifically, we'll be taking a look from the perspective of a Magicka Nightblade, so just bear in mind that the results that we see here today are going to be limited to just the Magicka Nightblade. Your results might differ depending on the specific class that you're running, so for example Maxorc or Magplar, you might see a couple of different results here and there, but just based on what I know so far, it does seem like whatever results we see here today should be fairly applicable across all the different classes in the game right now. So before we get started on kind of taking a look at the parts and things like that, I do want to kind of discuss a little bit the kind of theory behind why False God's Devotion might end up being a really good set here. So a couple of things happened between when False God's Devotion was initially announced and when PTS was actually launched. So the first thing, big thing that changed was the fact that food has been nerfed. So Clockwork Filet, which is the typical food that you would be running in trials just for the additional regen. You don't necessarily have to run this, especially if you have healers running Symphony of Blades and you have good orb support and Worm going, but this is a pretty solid food to choose for Magicka Nightblade. It will never steer you wrong. The Max Health and Max Magicka here did end up getting nerfed. So the values here are a little bit incorrect because it seems like they decreased it by 1.5% rather than the anticipated 15%, but once that is corrected, we will see lower max health and lower max magicka. As a result of this, a lot of people are thinking that, well, we still want to preserve our max health, we still want to preserve our max magicka, so let's try using blue food and running False God Devotion instead. The False God's Devotion is a new set that comes from Sunspire. It's the Light Armorer Magicka DPS set. So here I have the perfected version. There is a imperfect version as well. So the perfect version drops from Vet. Don't have to clear it on hard mode, just regular Vet is fine, which makes it a little bit more accessible to everybody else. As long as your group is able to clear VMAW, you should be able to clear Vet Sunspire without any of the hard modes. So False God's Devotion, when it was initially released, we kind of blew it off because it was just a Magicka Vicious Ophidian, and we didn't really need it because all of us were basically using the Magicka enchants or using Clockwork Filet. We had Orb, we had Worm, we were using Symphony of Blades, so we didn't really have that big of an issue when it came to sustain. However, with this change to the max resources that we're getting, it might be more beneficial to use this set and use blue food instead. So False God's Devotion adds Spell Crit as a 2-piece, Minor Slayer as a 3-piece, Spell Crit as the 4-piece, 129 spell damage as the 5-piece, and it also reduces the cost of magic abilities by 8% on the 5-piece, and when you kill an enemy you restore 250 magicka and gain major exhibition for 8 seconds. Again, basically the magicka version of Vicious Ophidian. The perfect version of False God's Devotion does add max magicka onto the 5-piece here. So you can see here that this is actually a pretty strong set. Even though it is just a Magicka version of Vicious Ophidian, which is not really used all too much on stamina DPS anymore, it's still really strong because you're getting essentially 4 standard armor bonuses. So you have Spell Crit, Spell Damage, Max Magicka. You're gaining Minor Slayer as well, so that's another bonus there. And then you're also getting some sustain from that cost reduction, which might end up being beneficial. You might be able to use blue food instead to get more max resources, more max health that way. So that was kind of the theory behind running False God's Devotion. Now, in order to test this theory out, I basically made the build with the Magicka Nightblade and did a couple of tests on the Raid Dummy. The new Raid Dummy does give out buffs and debuffs, and it does have 21 million health, so it is going to be better overall because it is a longer parse, so it'll be able to kind of get rid of any sort of crit RNG that might be factoring into the shorter 6-month dummy parses instead. So the build itself, I swapped out the body set, so I swapped out between the 3 different Minor Slayer sets that Magicka DPS typically wear. So either Perfected False God's Devotion, Master Architect like I have here because we are in a Magicka Nightblade, and Sororia. So those were the 3 sets that I tested out on the body. So I used all Divines, all Max Magicka enchants, Zahn as my monster helm, so I had a heavy medium, so 511. I did use a max health enchant on the head because realistically that's what you would normally be doing if you're going to be running the new Clockwork Filet food. You'll not be able to sustain Master Architect or Sororia using blue food on a Magicka Nightblade, so we will be running Clockwork Filet, and so I end up using a max health enchant. Now, when we use False God's Devotion with blue food, we're getting more health, so I swap this out with a Magicka enchant instead. So for False God's Devotion, it does allow you to use all max Magicka enchants compared to using Clockwork Filet with the other two sets, where you will need to make up that loss in health somewhat. For our second set, our front bar set, I just stuck with Mother's Sorrow. All Bloodthirsty were our jewelry traits, all spell damage enchants for our jewelry enchants. Front bar was a precise Inferno Staff with a flame damage enchant, and the back bar was an infused Maelstrom Inferno Staff with a weapon damage enchant here. Character sheet, Dark Elf, just because I love my Dark Elf, I just can't fathom playing anything besides a Dark Elf really. All of our points went into Max Magicka here. Shadowstone was our Mundus. And then Clockwork Filet, we were using that with Sororia and Master Architect, but with False God's Devotion, we were using blue food instead. Skill bars were pretty much your standard Magicka Nightblade setup, so Impale, Swallow Soul, Twisting Path, Relentless Focus, this should not be Relentless Focus, it should be the other morph of, this should be Merciless Resolve here. Inner Light, Fiery Rage, then this is normally where I'd put my shield, but you can put something like Inner Light instead. Or Ellie Drain, in this case I had Invigorating Drain just so I can get back my ultimate really fast. Crippling Grasp, Blockade of Fire, Siphoning Attacks, Rearming Trap, Full Harvest. So again, pretty standard Magicka Nightblade build here. TPs, again, also very standard. I might have Stam Nightblade because I did have Relentless rather than Merciless. Yeah, so I have 75 Arcana, 75 Tenacity, and then the other 120 really wherever, so 40, 40, 40. For blue CPs, we distribute these accordingly. I had 37 into Thaumaturge, I had 66 into Master at Arms, 9 into Staff Expert, 64 into Elemental Expert, 22 into Spell Erosion, remaining 72 went into Elfborn like so. And then red CPs don't really matter because obviously we're not actually getting hit, so I just put them in where I normally would. So again, pretty cut and dry standard Magicka Nightblade build. So here are our parses. So it's going to be these first 6 parses here that we're going to be taking a look at here. So this right here is False God's Devotion. You can tell that because we did have higher Max Magicka overall. So for the 2 False God Devotion parses, we got 66.7k, hit 65.8k. Next 2 parses are our Master Architect, so you can see here, player 50%. There 50%, so pretty much right about what we would expect to get. 63.4k, 62.8k. These last 2 parses are with Sororia, 66.6k, 66.4k. Again, if we zoom this out here to get a little bit of a bigger picture, we can see that Sororia does end up being higher on average. The highest parse did end up going to False God's Devotion with blue food, but just looking at the parses themselves does not really tell the whole story, and there are some caveats here, some pros and cons with each set here. Obviously, Master Architect will give you the most group utility because it does provide Major Slayer to 2 other people. Sororia does have the weakness in the fact that in certain fights it's not going to be very usable, or rather it's going to be a little bit more difficult to maintain good stacks. It's still a very strong set, but this is a very idealized scenario where you're able to maintain 20 stacks of Sororia. You certainly can do that if you are very skilled and you're very cognizant of how many stacks you're getting, and maintaining those stacks, but in reality, in real raid scenarios, you probably will not be able to get a constant 20 stacks of Sororia. So this parse is basically the idealized Sororia parse. It's not really going to be representative of what you're going to be doing in a trial. So False God's Devotion is probably going to be the most realistic, alongside with obviously the Master Architect parse. But again, the parse itself doesn't tell the whole story. You kind of also want to take a look at regen versus drain per second. So you can see here, 1401 to 1512, and 1406 to 1506. So we're looking at about 100 additional drain versus regen. And if we compare it to our Master Architect, remember this is with gold food, not blue food, we can see the disparity is a lot smaller. 1661 to 1670, so 9 difference. The other parse is equal, so 1693 to 1693. See a very similar trend here with Sororia, so much smaller difference here between your regen and drain per second. And if we go ahead and take a look at our actual graph here, and we add in our Max Magicka, so Magicka percentage, you can see here for False God's Devotion, even though we are getting some pretty decent sustain, our Magicka just keeps on dropping and dropping and dropping. This is a 5-minute long parse, so we didn't actually run out of Magicka until the very end of the parse. We were just spamming our execute here. Here you can see we did end up bottoming out on Magicka once, so I did have to do, I think I did a heavy attack here. Yeah, I did one heavy attack here on this parse. I did not get to do a heavy attack here, so I've managed to luck out here. But with False God's Devotion, you still will need to do heavy attacks with the blue food. Again, this is a 5-minute long parse, so if you're in those very, very high-end groups, your fights probably will not be lasting this long, but for more progression-style guilds, this is fairly realistic for some boss fights, perhaps. But if your fight is taking probably 3 minutes, you're probably been taking a look at more longer on this line here, in which case you will see we still have some Magicka left. We're bottoming out at about 25% here, around 180 seconds. But for longer fights, you can see we are bottoming out. And if we take a look at Master Architect, we never really dropped below 50% max Magicka. Same thing with this Master Architect parse, and this is with the Soria parse. Again, didn't drop below 50% on either of these parses here. So you're basically taking a look at, do I want to basically suffer some sustain loss here in exchange for a little bit higher DPS, or if you want to run something like Sororia or Master Architect with gold food, you're getting some pretty decent sustain here. You're never dropping below 50% max Magicka at all, which is really nice. You don't necessarily have to worry about running out of Magicka ever, but you are going to end up eating a little bit of a DPS loss. So again, Master Architect, you're looking at 62.8k, 62.9k, and 63.4k compared to 65.8 and 66.7k with the blue food with False God's Devotion. So for me personally, I'd probably err on the side of getting a little bit more sustain out, but again, there are a couple of caveats here and there you do want to take into consideration, particularly the fact that the Sororia parses that we got here are very, very idealized. You probably hit a little bit lower just because you're not really going to be able to sustain a full 20 stacks of Sororia here. So 94% of the fight we had our max Sororia stacks, which is not very realistic in most trials. So that is it for this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below, and I'll try to answer any questions you guys might have. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on False God's Devotion. This really sort of opened my eyes up. This was taken from a couple of ideas that we had in Toxic Raiding environment concerning False God's Devotion and using it with blue food once we heard that gold food, the max resources, were going to end up getting nerfed. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.